see him. Stay ready. Your eyes peeled. Something's out there. I feel it. Not alone. Take him! Easy, boy. Watch out!
In God's name is that? Get back! Move! Get back!
Don't do it. I have to. It's not worth it. Put the gun down.
I've been waiting.
An Apache elder saw the mark on his hand. You carry the werewolf's curse. The wind stopped first, not slowed, stopped all at once, the way breath stops in a throat before a scream. The mesquite branches froze mid-sway. Somewhere below the ridge, a jackrabbit bolted from cover for no reason a man could see, and the horses in the corral began to scream and kick against the rails, eyes rolling white in the dark. Caleb Whitlock stood in the doorway of his cabin with a lantern shaking in his hand, staring at the tree line where the moon hung low and swollen behind a curtain of thin cloud. Something was moving out there, not walking, pacing. He looked down at his right hand, at the mark that had bloomed there 3 nights ago, dark and crescent-shaped, spreading slow beneath the skin like ink in water. And for the first time in his life, Caleb understood what it meant to be hunted by something that already knew his name. Caleb Whitlock had buried his wife and daughter 11 months before the mark appeared. And in that time, he had learned that grief did not fade. It simply changed shape. The way water becomes ice, hard and silent, and taking up more room than it should. The ranch sat 2 hours' ride from the nearest township, in a stretch of high desert country, where the wind carried dust instead of rain most months of the year, and where a man could go a week without hearing another human voice besides his own. That suited Caleb fine. After the fever took Sarah and little Ruth in the same terrible span of 4 days, he had stopped wanting company. He fed the cattle, mended the fences, and at night he sat on the porch with a bottle he rarely finished, watching the dark come down over the land like something settling in to stay. He was 34 years old and already felt like a man built out of leftover pieces. The mesquite thicket to the north of his property had always unsettled him, though he could never say why. His father, before he passed, used to say the old Apache bands avoided that stretch of ground entirely. Called it cursed ground or something close to it, though the old man's Spanish had never been reliable, and his English less so. Caleb had laughed it off as a young man. Land was land. Dirt didn't remember anything. He didn't feel that way anymore. It started with the dreams, not nightmares exactly. Nothing so simple as monsters or blood. Just a sensation of running, low to the ground, the smell of creosote and rabbit blood thick in his throat, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears like a drum circle he couldn't escape. He woke each morning with his hands aching, his jaw sore as though he'd been grinding his teeth all night. And once, only once, and he told himself he'd imagined it, with dirt beneath his fingernails and the bottoms of his bare feet raw and torn. 3 nights ago, the mark had appeared. He'd been mending a section of fence when a sharp pain lanced through his right palm, sudden as a wasp's sting. When he looked down, there was nothing there, no cut, no thorn, nothing to explain it. But by that evening, a shape had begun to surface beneath the skin, dark as a bruise, curved like a claw or a crescent moon, and it did not fade with time the way a bruise should. If anything, it deepened. He told no one. There was no one close enough to tell. Se essa história já está te prendendo, se inscreva no canal, deixa o like e conta nos comentários de qual país e cidade você está assistindo, porque o que vem a seguir muda tudo o que o Caleb pensava saber sobre si mesmo. It was 2 days after that when he first saw the old man. He was standing at the edge of the mesquite thicket in the gray hour before dawn, still as a fence post, watching Caleb's cabin with an attention that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition. He wore a wool coat against the morning cold, his hair long and white, and he carried nothing in his hands. No rifle, no walking stick, nothing but the weight of his own stillness. Caleb called out to him. The old man didn't answer. He simply turned, unhurried, and walked back into the trees, and by the time Caleb reached the tree line himself, there was no trace of him at all. No boot prints in the soft dirt, no broken branches, nothing but the cold smell of sage and the distant, mournful call of a mourning dove that seemed for just a moment to catch and hold too long, almost like a howl smoothed into something gentler. That night, Caleb didn't dream of running. He dreamed of his own hand, held up before a fire he didn't remember building, the mark glowing faint and amber beneath his skin like an ember that refused to die. And somewhere just beyond the firelight, a voice, low and patient, speaking words he couldn't understand, but somehow already knew the meaning of. You have been chosen. Now you must be told what that means. He woke at dawn in his own bed, boots still on, his right hand curled into a fist so tight the nails had cut half moons into his palm, right over the mark itself, as though something inside him had been trying to dig it out all night long. The second transformation began with sound. Caleb woke to his own heartbeat, but wrong, too slow, too heavy, like something enormous turning over deep beneath the earth. The cabin was dark, the fire long dead in the hearth, and when he tried to rise from bed, his hands wouldn't obey him properly. He looked down and saw his fingers had curled, rigid, the knuckles swollen and aching, black hair sprouting coarse along the backs of both hands where moments before there had been only skin. He didn't scream. He didn't have the breath for it. Pain arrived not as a single blow, but as a tide, his jaw aching first, then his spine. A deep, grinding pressure that traveled down each vertebra like a hand closing slowly around a rope. He fell from the bed and struck the floorboards hard, and the impact seemed to come from very far away, muffled as though his body had already begun to belong to someone else. Not now. Not like this. Not alone. He crawled toward the door on limbs that no longer moved the way he told them to, and by the time his hand, no longer entirely a hand, found the latch, the pain had begun to recede, replaced by something worse, clarity. A terrible animal clarity, sharp as new cut glass, in which the smell of the ranch came to him in 100 separate threads. Dust, cattle, his own old sweat on the blanket, and underneath it all, something wild and copper-sweet drifting down from the mesquite thicket. Hunger, sudden and enormous, rose in him like flood water. He does not remember opening the door. He remembers the cold night air on fur he didn't have an hour before. He remembers running low across the yard on legs that bent wrong, powerful and fast in a way his human body had never been. The ground blurring beneath him, every sound in the desert suddenly close and loud in his. He remembers standing over the corral, the horses screaming, rearing against the rails hard enough to splinter wood, and some last thread of the man he'd been pulling him back from the fence at the final moment. Some smaller voice underneath the hunger saying, "Not them, not them. They're yours. They trust you." And then nothing. A gap in the night like a page torn from a book. He woke at first light in the mesquite thicket, human again, naked to the waist with his shirt torn to rags around one shoulder, his bare feet cut and bleeding from stone and thorn he hadn't felt at all. His hands trembled violently. There was dirt packed hard beneath every fingernail, and when he pressed his palm flat against the cold ground to steady himself, he saw that the mark had changed. Darker now, deeper, the crescent shape somehow more defined, as if the thing living beneath his skin had grown a little more solid overnight. He did not go looking for the old man. The old man was waiting for him. He sat on a flat stone at the thicket's edge as though he had been there for hours, perhaps all night, watching the place where Caleb had fallen with an expression that held no fear at all, only a tired, ancient patience, the look of a man watching a storm he had seen coming from a long way off. "You ran," the old man said, not a question. Caleb's throat was raw. I don't remember what I did. That is the mercy of it, for now." The old man studied him a long moment, eyes moving over the torn shirt, the bloodied feet, the hand Caleb was trying uselessly to hide against his side. "Show me." Caleb hesitated, then held out his palm. The old man did not flinch at the mark. He leaned close, studied it the way a physician studies a wound, and something in his face changed. Not surprise, but recognition, old and grim. "I know this mark," he said quietly. "My grandfather's brother wore one like it. Many winters before I was born, he did not live to see it fade." He looked up, and his eyes held no comfort in them, only truth. "You carry the werewolf's curse, boy, and it did not choose you by accident. Nothing wearing that mark ever does." "Then take it off me," Caleb said, and hated how much his voice shook. "Whatever it takes, tell me." The old man rose slowly, joints stiff with age, and looked toward the mesquite thicket, toward whatever lay beyond it, deeper in the hills, where the old paths ran that white men had long since stopped walking. "There is no removing what has already been given," he said. "There is only learning to carry it before it carries you instead." He turned, began walking. "Come. If you want to live long enough to understand what you are, you will follow me now, while there is still enough of the man left in you to listen." The old man's name was Nantan Goyathley's cousin, though he never gave it plainly, only said, when Caleb finally asked, "You may call me Hosteen, it will do." He led Caleb 3 miles deeper into the hills to a hollow, shielded by rock walls, where a cold spring bubbled up through pale stone. And there, over the following days, he taught him what little could be taught in so short a time. How to recognize the pull of the change before it took him fully. How to bind his hands with rawhide strips soaked in bitter root to slow the shift by an hour, sometimes 2. How to choose if choice was still possible. A place to run that would harm no one. Choice grows smaller each time, Osteen warned him on the second night, watching the fire instead of Caleb's face. The first years, a man still fights it. Later. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. But the hills were not so empty as Caleb had believed, and the ranch he'd abandoned was not so far removed from other eyes. Tom Yancey, who ran 300 head of cattle on the spread bordering Caleb's land to the east, found the first carcass on a Tuesday morning, a heifer torn open in a way no coyote or mountain lion could account for. The ground around it churned and clawed, tracks pressed deep into the dirt that started as something almost like a wolf's and ended 20 feet on, looking unmistakably like the print of a bare human foot. He said nothing to Caleb. He rode instead to town. By the following week, 3 more animals had been found. One of Yancey's, 2 belonging to the Prescott family, further south. And the talk in the general store had shifted from curious to fearful, then from fearful to something with teeth in it. Someone remembered that Whitlock's wife and child had died of fever less than a year past. Someone else remembered that nobody had seen Caleb in town since. A logic began to assemble itself in the way that frightened, isolated communities always assemble logic, not from evidence, but from absence and grief, and the deep human need to put a name to what stalks in the dark. Man goes quiet like that after a loss, old Ezra Prescott said, low over his coffee. Sometimes something quiet goes and finds him instead. Nobody laughed. By the time Caleb returned to his ranch, hollow-eyed, leaner, the rawhide burn still raw around his wrists, Sheriff Boone Calloway was already waiting on his porch with 2 deputies, and Tom Yancey standing grim behind him, shotgun broken open over his arm in a way that wasn't quite a threat and wasn't quite not one either. "Caleb," the sheriff's voice was careful, neighborly even. That was almost worse, and been some trouble round here, stock torn up bad, tracks nobody can rightly explain. "I've been away," Caleb said. It was true, and it felt like the largest lie he'd ever told. Away where? He had no answer that wouldn't sound like madness. The silence stretched long enough that Yancey's jaw tightened, and Caleb watched the men's eyes move, to his torn shirt, to the rawhide-scarred wrists he hadn't thought to hide, to the hollow, haunted look he knew was written plain across his face, whether he wanted it there or not. "We ain't accusing you of nothing," the sheriff said in the tone of a man who was, in fact, beginning to. "But folks are scared, Caleb. Scared people do things. I'd take it kindly if you stayed close to home a spell, where we can find you if we need to." They rode off without waiting for an answer. That night, Hosteen appeared at the tree line again, as he always seemed to, as though the land itself told him where to be. "They will hunt you soon," he said, "not the mesquite men. I know it." Caleb's hands had not stopped shaking since the sheriff left. "Then you have a choice, smaller than the one I offered you, but a choice still." Hosteen's eyes in the dark held something almost like sorrow. "Run far from this place and become nothing to anyone who ever loved you, or stay, and let them see what you carry before it chooses the moment for you." He paused. "The curse does not care what you choose, but you should." Se essa história já está te prendendo, se inscreva no canal, deixa o like e conta nos comentários de qual país e cidade você está assistindo. Porque o capítulo 4 é onde tudo desanda. They came at dusk, when the light turned the color of a healing bruise and the mesa cast long shadows a man could hide a dozen riders inside. Caleb heard them before he saw them, hoofbeats on hardpan, the particular jangle of men carrying more iron than usual. Voices pitched low in the way voices go when courage is being manufactured rather than felt. He counted 7 from the porch. Sheriff Calloway rode at the front. Tom Yancey rode near the back, rifle resting across his saddle, his face carved from something that wasn't quite hatred and wasn't quite fear, but close kin to both. Caleb Whitlock. The sheriff's voice carried flat across the yard. "Step on out where we can see you." He stepped out. There was nowhere left to run to that wouldn't be running forever. "Found something out past the Prescott place this morning," Calloway said. "Boy's dog tore up bad, and Prince leading back this way, same as before." He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't need to. 6 others were doing that math for him. "I need you to come with us peaceable. Let the judge in Silver Creek sort what's true." I didn't touch that dog. It was, as far as Caleb knew, the truth. But he understood standing there that truth had stopped being the currency anyone was trading in. The sun kept sinking. That was the only clock that mattered now, and every man on that ranch except Caleb was ignorant of it. He felt it begin low in his spine. The old ache, the wrongness under the skin, that sooner and faster than it had ever come before, hurried along. He would understand only later, by the raw animal terror of 7 armed men and the smell of their fear reaching him even at this distance. He pressed his marked hand against his thigh, hard, willing it still. "Sheriff," his voice came out strangled, "you need to leave, now, all of you." "That ain't how this works, son. Please." Yancey's horse shied without cause, snorting, backing hard against the reins. Animals always knew first. And that single, unexplainable moment of chaos was the only warning anyone got before Caleb's shirt tore down the spine, and the change took him standing upright in his own yard, in the last dying light in front of every man who had ridden out to judge him. The horses screamed and bolted as one. 2 deputies were thrown clean from their saddles. Yancey's rifle came up on reflex, shaking badly, and Calloway's shout, "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" arrived a half-second too late to stop the shot that went wide into the dark and did nothing but confirm to every man present that the stories were true. What stood in Caleb's place was 7 feet of muscle and matted fur and amber eyes that still, somewhere far beneath the animal clarity, held a shred of grief, too old and too human to belong to any true wolf. It did not lunge. For one suspended moment it simply stood, chest heaving, claws flexing at its sides, caught between the hunger and whatever fragment of Caleb Whitlock remained awake enough to recognize these men as neighbors rather than prey. That moment saved lives. It did not save the night. Hosteen's voice cut across the yard from the tree line, sharp and commanding in a language none of the riders understood, and the creature's head snapped toward the sound the way a man snaps awake from a nightmare. It turned from the men. It ran. Not toward them, but past them, into the mesquite, into the dark, with a speed that left the remaining riders too stunned to give chase even if their courage had allowed it. Calloway sat his horse a long while afterward, staring at the empty yard, at the torn shirt lying in the dirt like a shed skin. "Lord," he finally said to no one. "Lord above." Nobody argued the truth of what they'd seen. Nobody needed to. Deep in the hills, past the spring, past the place where the old paths ran, Caleb woke at dawn with blood he didn't recognize under his claws. No, his nails human again, shaking alone, and Hostine sitting across the dead fire from him, watching with the same tired patience as always, though something in his face had changed. Something like resolve. "They will come back," Hostine said, "with more men, more guns. Then I'll leave tonight. Before anyone else? No." Hostine's voice was quiet, final. Running has never once ended this. Only facing it has. He rose slow and stiff and looked toward the ridge where dawn was breaking pale gold over the hills. "Tonight we do not run from what hunts you, Caleb Whitlock. Tonight we teach it that you are no longer easy prey." They didn't have to wait long. Riders' torches showed on the ridge before full dark. More than 7 this time, word having spread fast the way fear always spreads faster than truth. Calloway was among them still, though his face in the torchlight looked less like a lawman's and more like a man being dragged along by something bigger than his own resolve. Hostine had chosen the ground carefully, the hollow by the spring, walled in rock on 3 sides, a place where a fight could be controlled rather than scattered across open country. "Here," he'd said, "or nowhere. A cornered thing that cannot run stops thinking like a hunted man and starts thinking like what it is protecting." He did not explain further. Caleb understood only when the change came over him again, faster now, almost welcomed, and some deep animal part of him recognized the hollow as den rather than trap. The riders came down into the rocks in a ragged line, torches guttering, and what met them was not the confused, half-formed creature from the ranch yard, but something colder, more deliberate. Caleb's amber eyes tracking each man in turn, not with hunger now, but with something closer to warning. "Nobody has to die tonight," Hostine called out to them, standing between the riders and the thing his student had become. Empty hands raised, an old man's voice steady against 7 guns. "Lower your rifles. Let an old fool speak before young fools shoot." Calloway raised a hand, halting the others. Yancey did not lower his rifle, and it was Yancey's finger that tightened first when the creature shifted its weight, not toward attack but instinctive, animal readiness. And it was Yancey's shot that Hostine stepped into without hesitation, without a word of warning to anyone, the old man's body turning at the last possible instant to take what had been aimed at the boy he'd spent his final days trying to save. He went down hard against the stone. What happened after? The riders would never agree on in all the years they told the story afterward in low voices over whiskey. Some swore the wolf screamed like a man. Some swore it simply stood over the old man's body, utterly still for the length of 10 long breaths, while 7 armed men who could have ended it in that moment found themselves unable to raise a single rifle. What is certain is that no one fired again, and that when the creature finally moved, it did not move toward them at all. It knelt, if a thing built like that could be said to kneel, and gathered Hostine's still body against itself with a gentleness that undid something in every man who witnessed it. By the time the moon set and the change released him, Caleb Whitlock was a man again, kneeling alone in the hollow, holding an old man who was already gone, while 7 riders stood at a distance and did not move to stop him, and did not move to help him either, only watched, understanding now that they had ridden out to kill a monster, and found instead a mourner. Calloway was the one who finally spoke. "We'll say it was a mountain lion," he said quiet to no one and everyone. "Took the old man before we could get a shot off clean." Nobody argued. Some kindnesses cost nothing to give. They left Caleb there at dawn with the body and did not come back that night or any night after. He buried Hostine in the hollow by the spring, beneath a cairn of pale stone, and it was there, clearing the old man's few belongings, that he found the pouch, worn leather tied with sinew, and inside it a single piece of bone no longer than a finger, carved with symbols Caleb didn't recognize, but somehow understood the weight of anyway. Not a cure? Hosteen had told him plainly there was none. A tether, maybe, a reminder that the curse could be carried without being surrendered to. Caleb wore it against his skin from that day on, beneath his shirt, over the place where his heart beat steady and human, most nights of the year. They still tell it different ways in that country, depending on who's doing the telling. A mountain lion story for the children, something closer to the truth for those who ask carefully and mean it. Caleb Whitlock lived another 30 years on that ranch alone by choice more than circumstance, and the mark never left his hand, though in time it faded to something you had to know to look for. He learned, as Hosteen had promised, to carry it rather than be carried by it. Most nights, not all. There is no story where the curse simply ends. There is only the version where a man learns to live beside it without losing the parts of himself worth keeping. The bone pouch was buried with him when his time finally came, resting against a heart that had, against every reasonable expectation, kept beating human for as long as it possibly could. If a curse like his has ever found its way to you, in your blood, your grief, or something you cannot yet name, we'd like to hear it. Subscribe and we'll meet again for the next story.